Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation. I'm excited to share with you our exploration of how beauty influences human behavior. The title of our talk is, This is not an attack on beautiful women. It's an exploration of how beauty changes human behavior, both in the woman herself and in everyone around her. Over the next few slides, we'll look at how societal reactions to beauty shape psychology and relationships. We'll also discuss the stereotype of hot girls are crazy and the psychological truths behind it. So, let's dive in and uncover what really lies beneath the surface. What we're really looking at here is that our perceptions are often not based on reality, but are shaped by patterns we've recognized. Patterns that are distorted by biases in the data we've been exposed to. For example, she doesn't see men as faithful individuals. Instead, she perceives them as opportunists driven by desire. When her future husband says he's going to the gym, she doesn't just hear that casually. She recalls how every man in that setting has hit on her before, and her mind projects those past experiences onto the present. This kind of pattern recognition creates a skewed view, making her believe that men are more likely to lie, risk careers, or even abandon families just to get close to her. And over time, hearing these stories repeatedly, she develops a deep cynicism about men in general. Now, this perception also influences how she sees different types of men. Those driven by lust are often bold, impulsive, and willing to risk everything. Meanwhile, the more timid ones are quiet, overly cautious, and too afraid to approach her. The key point here is that a very attractive woman rarely encounters men at their natural, average state. Instead, she tends to meet men at their extremes, either the bold, reckless types or the overly cautious ones. This distorted view, or what I call the distorted mirror, shows how beauty can warp men's behavior, pushing them into these exaggerated roles. And understanding this helps us see how perceptions can be skewed, leading us to believe in patterns that aren't entirely accurate, which is a crucial part of understanding human behavior in this context. So let's talk about what happens when a woman faces repeated exposure to male recklessness. Over time, innocence and naivety start to fade early on. This isn't about being crazy, but rather, it's a trauma response. She begins to develop hypervigilance. She's constantly scanning her environment for signs of betrayal or deception. This makes her suspicious, even controlling, because her trust has been eroded. Unlike the average woman who might still believe in loyalty and genuine interest, a woman who's experienced this recklessness has seen men become reckless for her attention. She's watched how lust can cause men to crumble, and because of that, she begins to believe that's all men are capable of, being driven by desire rather than genuine connection. Attractive women, in particular, tend to lose a certain kind of innocence that less conventionally attractive women might retain. They learn early that beauty can open doors, but it also erodes trust. This constant exposure to desire and betrayal creates a deep emotional shift, what I call losing naivety, that shapes how they see the world and their relationships. It's a powerful, often painful consequence of experiencing constant desire and the recklessness that can come with it. So, as a result, many beautiful women tend to become emotionally guarded. They might come across as distant, frosty, or even defensive, but it's important to understand they're not unfriendly. What they're really doing is protecting themselves. Beautiful women often live in what I'd call a silent war zone of social comparison. On one side, other women see them as threats, and on the other side, men tend to see them as trophies. Because of this, they learn pretty quickly that trust is rare, and genuine friendship can often hide underlying rivalry. And it's not just about how men perceive them. They also face hostility from other women. If you walk into a room with a woman who's stunning, just observe how other women react: stiff postures, forced smiles, eyes scanning suspiciously. This dynamic creates what I'd call the female battlefield. Beauty, in many cases, breeds competition. It's a challenging environment that shapes how these women navigate social interactions every day. Understanding this helps us see that their outward appearance isn't just about vanity. It's about survival in a space filled with complex social dynamics. But the world keeps reminding her that beauty is her currency. And when that currency starts to fade, it's natural for her to feel anxious. For an average woman, aging might just seem like part of life, but if she's considered beautiful, it can feel like her very identity is being erased. Over time, this uncertainty begins to eat away at her sense of self. She learns to countersignal, dressing down, hiding her looks, acting modest or bookish, all just to prove she's more than her appearance. She might ask herself, do I deserve this opportunity, or is it just my face doing the work? Would he respect me if I weren't attractive? Is he kind to me because I look good? Every interaction becomes a bit transactional. Yes, beauty can open doors, grant privilege, status, and opportunity. But it also creates what I like to call a reality distortion field, one where her worth is constantly filtered through how she looks. This brings us to a bigger theme: the power, the fear, and the identity struggles tied to pretty privilege. It's a complex, often contradictory experience where beauty can be both a blessing and a curse. Let's talk about the existential fear of losing relevance that many face as they age. This is often referred to as the crisis, because aging can threaten the very foundation of our identity. When appearance becomes the primary source of power, it's what I call the fade. People start to see their looks as their main leverage in society. Beauty then becomes like currency, something we trade on, something that grants us social influence. But it's important to understand that this isn't vanity. It's rooted in a deep fear of invisibility, that if we're no longer attractive, we might be overlooked or dismissed. Now, those who have strong values and inner stability tend to adapt. They shift their sense of identity away from external validation toward family, character, and purpose. But for others who rely solely on their looks for validation, the aging process can lead to insecurity, cosmetic obsession, or even promiscuity, desperate attempts to reclaim lost power. Imagine a woman who has built her self-worth on her beauty. When that beauty fades, she faces an existential crisis. If her looks have been her leverage, her social power, her identity, then aging can feel like a fall from grace. This decline of power, then, becomes painfully real when beauty fades. It's a universal experience that challenges us to find new sources of worth and meaning beyond the external. So, what we're seeing here is that she often finds herself repeatedly encountering the worst types of men. This pattern reinforces her distrust in others, especially in romantic contexts. Now, when a woman is considered hot, it activates a man's short-term mating system. This system is impulsive, driven by lust, and focused on conquest rather than long-term connection. That's why a hot girl tends to attract men who are more interested in possession rather than protection. Her dating pool, therefore, is often filled with emotionally immature, high-risk men. And it's important to understand that she's not necessarily choosing these men intentionally. Instead, these are the ones who are bold, or sometimes reckless, enough to approach her. On the other side, men often project their fantasies onto beautiful women. They tend to confuse her physical attractiveness with deeper qualities, like emotional depth. They might mistake attention for genuine affection, and physical sex appeal for emotional connection. From the male perspective, this is a common misreading of beauty. They see the surface, but they often overlook the complexities beneath. This disconnect can lead to misunderstandings about what women truly want and need. And it ties back into the larger theme of how perceptions of beauty influence interactions and expectations in relationships. Let's talk about how chronic emotional turbulence can stem from distorted social feedback. When someone is constantly surrounded by jealousy from peers and partners, it creates a sense of instability. This environment feeds into feelings of envy, which can be very destructive. And it's important to recognize how society often reduces a woman to her appearance, seeing her as a visual object rather than a whole person. This objectification leads to her being misunderstood and envied, rather than appreciated for her full humanity. All of this combined, jealousy from both partners and peers, creates emotional turbulence. She becomes hyper-aware of threats, constantly on edge, yet still starved for real safety and security. This is where the stereotype of the crazy hot girl often originates, not because of inherent madness, but because of this ongoing emotional instability caused by distorted social feedback. A woman who is viewed solely through her beauty, without emotional grounding, can become volatile, not by nature, but due to conditioning. She's been objectified, envied, and misunderstood for so long that forming stable attachments becomes a challenge. And here's the core equation. Beauty plus insecurity equals chaos. When external beauty masks internal insecurity, it often results in emotional chaos, which feeds into this cycle of instability. So, understanding this helps us see how social perceptions and feedback loops contribute to emotional turbulence, especially for women judged primarily on their appearance. Let's talk about how we can turn insecurity into something healthier, into awareness and boundaries that serve us. Instead of feeling jealous and overwhelmed, we learn to see these feelings as signals that point us toward understanding ourselves better. By transforming jealousy, we create a strong sense of self that remains steady no matter what's happening around us. Establishing independence is crucial. This means developing passions and goals that are uniquely ours, things that aren't dependent on a partner's approval or presence. When we build that kind of purpose, we start to see ourselves clearly and value ourselves beyond external validation. Recognizing dependency is key here. When our self-worth is tied solely to how others see us, especially our partners, we lose our emotional balance. But when we have purpose, passions, and independence, jealousy shifts into awareness. We no longer panic at the idea of losing love because we understand that our identity isn't rooted in someone else's attention. Remember, for any woman, whether she's perceived as beautiful or not, jealousy and insecurity can only be managed effectively by cultivating an identity outside of the relationship. The moment we rely on our partner's attention to define our worth, we risk losing ourselves emotionally. Beyond just managing jealousy, this is about finding stability. It's about creating a resilient, secure sense of who we are that isn't shaken by external circumstances. That's the real path to emotional freedom and a healthy, balanced relationship. So behind every crazy hot girl is actually a woman who's seen and experienced a lot, often too much, too soon. It's important to recognize that her challenge isn't about being irrational or unpredictable, but about separating her self-worth from her appearance. She's trying to find peace in her identity, beyond just validation from others. As a society, we have a responsibility to stop simplifying these complex psychological experiences into shallow stereotypes. We tend to box people into labels that don't really capture their humanity, and that's unfair. What I want you to understand is that the hot girl isn't crazy. She's been exposed to the extremes of human desire, longing, and insecurity. She lived in a world where people projected their fantasies, fears, and insecurities onto her long before she even knew who she truly was. And that brings us to the conclusion. Beauty is power, but power comes with a cost. It's a reminder that beauty can elevate us, but it also exposes us to certain vulnerabilities and pressures that we need to be mindful of.